The Carchole's Cave by A.R. Kavli. Read by A.R. Kavli. "Why do you glare at me so, Elaine?" my priest asked, knowing the answer already. My ire was meant to be firmly hidden behind the holy and placid mask of a deacon of the church. "Forgive me, mon père," I said in earnest, "but I see your true vestments hanging idly in the wardrobe, whilst you slip on these filthy pagan rags." Clement did not look at me as he replied, distracted as he was, trying to get the stained, age-worn crown of antlers to stay in place. His venerable pate was nearly bald, so that only the faintest hint of his tonsure was visible, and then only in the proper light. The headdress continually slipped off to one side due to the uneven weight of the antlers, and the problem was made worse for the priest's slick scalp. "And you well know the reason, young frere." The smudged, pudgy reflection in the priest's mirror looked triumphantly back at us as the crown held steady. "You may have been kicking your heels up in Paris as you studied, but your birth record is here in the lectern, as is your father's, and his before. And this," Clement scowled as the headdress slipped down over his right eye, "has been here before even the Romans." "I know that is what is said," I objected. "But do you think so, truly? It is antique, to be certain, but I know old Alice has fixed that head-bone thrice at least. Surely it cannot be so old, at least not the sorry hide that holds it so barely together." "Perhaps not," the priest said. "The antlers, the heart of this thing, have certainly been here an age at least. I assure you, my son, I take no joy in the wearing of this." Clement grimaced in frustration and set the so-called crown aside. "But there are some things more ancient than even the Holy Church." "Is it more powerful?" My mentor was a kindly, conciliatory man, and I seldom pressed any conflict with him, for he loved his flock so, it is true. And in my short time at university in Paris, which Clement always mentioned with equal measures of pride and scorn, I had likely studied more of the Holy Scriptures than he had his whole life. Mon père knew well the masses and prayers in Latin, though I suspected he knew only the recital of them and not their meaning. Yet I loved him as I loved the church, and this idolatry tore at my spirit sorely. "Do you approach blasphemy, Elaine? Well, you know that Satan is real, as is Leviathan and Behemoth, yes? Yet they are subservient to the church and the Santa Marie." "We certainly do not do heathen rituals to them," I said, with my wrath rising, forgive me, Lord. "As real as they may be, mon Dieu, that you ask me of blasphemy tucked as you are in those foul skins." Père Clement brushed down the tufts of fur that clung desperately to the worn deerskin robe that hung just above his bony ankles. Ominous stains mottled the ancient hide. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, dabbing at the corners delicately. "Why do you vex me so, son? Why vex God so, Père? God has allowed the Carchole to live here these many years. I was once like you know. I too vex mon père imbellet, saying much the same as you say. I did not have the privilege of Paris, mind you, but any young acolyte should be discomfited by the thing if they've paid a bit of attention, as should every layman and wife in this village. But I saw it, Elaine. Santa Maria is my witness. I watched the beast murder a chevalier, Raymond Blanc, then a cousin of the Viscount." He reached out and firmly grasped my shoulders to make sure I was looking into his eyes. "Listen carefully. Years ago, when I was an acolyte, a servant of Raymond heard me complaining once about this pagan ritual and reported it to his master. When the chevalier rode across the bridge and sought me out here at the church, I feared greatly that he had come in the spirit of his damned Gallican lords to declare us heretic and put an end to us." Here Clement genuflected, as he did always when speaking of anything that challenged, or he perceived to challenge, the Holy See. "The Viscount wouldn't dare come himself, but this chevalier must have been about something to have travelled so far, for surely he lived in the castle." "Just so," Clement agreed, "and that fact alone had us in great discomfort. Yet when Raymond reared to a stop, fully arrayed in his harness, he merely called out that he had an appointment with our monster, since the priests could seemingly not guard their flock against it. Like you, Elaine, I have grown up with this unholy day. It is a most dire tradition, older than even the remains of the Roman port in our lovely breach. Yet it was a shame to mon père then, even as it is to me. But by God, I saw the Chevalier's death. Verily, he almost slipped from the cliff path to his death. He held on, though, for all the good it did his poor soul. For no sooner had he stepped a foot in the cave than he was jerked inside, followed by an inhuman scream bellowing from the dark. The poor man's lantern and sword fell to the river ere the beast stopped howling. Aye, and I were there too. Clement and I jumped at the noisome interruption of Signor Giraud Paquin. He had lost his left eye. There were countless tales as to how, ages before I was born, and the effect was to make his weathered, ever-petulant face look all the worse. It seemed as if his wrinkled cheek and brow had closed around the socket in the eye's absence. All the children of the village, myself included, feared the landlord for his unwavering love of the lash for any infraction, grave or slight. This fear grew to loathing with age, yet the Paquins had been given the care of our poor cursed village, even before the ancient system of serfdom had been ostensibly abolished, and their family position retained by popular consent. Viscount Chabert was happy to support the choice, as long as La Noblesse got their revenue and never had to set foot across our Roman bridge. I well remember, Signor, Clement said, quickly taking up the headdress. And his nosy whelp of a shield-bearer ran like the wind. Gerard set his rough, thick fists on his hips as he took in the scene. Aye, him and other wayfarers and ne'er-do-wells, and damn fool boys of our own town who forget their lessons doing dares and pranks. It is no comfort to poor Sicart that the body is all washing to the bend of the river where he fishes. Do you also remember, mon père, what happened that year? I see you do by your evil eye. The year you convinced old Imbeled not to hold our ceremony? Has he told you, Frère Alain? No? A blight on the grapes, 3 bulls mauled in their pens, and 8 children dead of the pox? 8. Even one of my own nieces. Do not forget that lesson, Clement. And do not let this pup, who obviously didn't lash hard enough to put sense into him, convince you otherwise. He rolled his solitary, baleful eye at me and frowned. And you best hurry. Them outside are getting afeared. They, he jabbed his finger painfully into my chest, have no doubts about God nor about what lurks in the cave below since before time. As if to prove the old squire's point, we heard an ancient murmur without. The small chapel that served our village was built on quaint Roman stone ruins. The large central stone room remained in full repair and was furnished as the sanctuary. The rest of the building consisted of modern timber additions that looked barbaric next to the venerable masonry, despite the fine woodwork. All in all, a sturdy building, but not one to withstand an angry mob. Yes, of course. Clement set the antler crown upon his head and held it in place with a shaking hand. With the other hand he cut off my rising objection. That is quite enough, Alain. We shall do this. I'll hold absolution for the whole village, and then we hold mass for La Toussaint tomorrow, as has always been done. All the saints shall smile down on us. He rushed past me without a look. I stood staring out the door after him. I silently considered all that I'd heard, thinking to return to my small room for prayer and then scour dishes while the abomination unfolded. My head was set to harsh criticism of mon père, yet my heart reminded me that I had indeed carried on in the ritual nearly every year of my life, as had my parents and theirs before them. But now I knew better, even if my elders did not. Timothy was not to allow his youth to be held against him, so saith St. Paul. Still, I was only 15, and my schooling, though grand compared to the kith and kin in my village, was but very little. In fact, my tonsure was still a slight matter of embarrassment for me in the company of the lads with whom I'd grown up. I cogitated on so, until a loud intrusion into my ruminations made me jump. Well, Gerard barked, his finger in my face. Get on after your master, Frere. I won't. Gerard's face immediately screwed up in the savage mix of the outrage and rapturous joy for which he was well known whenever challenged. You will, whelp. I won't have you bring a pox on our head with your foolery. But, signor, The sick rope around Gerard's waist was set into a clever slip knot so that he could, as he had just done, give a single pull and have his lash in hand. A heavy knot weighed each end of the rope, and by holding it in the direct center, the sadistic old man had a two-tongued flog ever at the ready. He drew his hand back, the rope ends dancing eagerly behind. University or no, I gathered my robe and strode out with what little dignity I could muster, twisting like a child, futilely trying to avoid a spanking in the small entryway as I passed. It had only been 2 years since my last lashing, and it yet stood in my memory like a scar, though uncorroborated by my smooth back. Gerard was a man who knew how to whip and leaves a person well enough to still take to the plough. I lamented that I had not the spirit of a martyr. Soon after the heresy, we'd give Mass for the blessed saints who had suffered for the Church in ways that defied my young imagination. At the first threat of an old man's lash, though, I had fled from my loudly announced conviction. Gerard didn't tie the rope around his waist until we were both in the field where the villagers gathered. They looked on anxiously as the sun's bottommost point dipped ever closer to the hills that hid the abandoned Roman port some miles away. The villagers stood on the sun side of the pasture while Clement stood near the bridge, the ravine, and the cave below. Between the villagers and the priest was a large wolf with its paws and muzzle tied stoutly, a wooden coop with a rooster, and a small leather sack that I knew to be filled with the black, wrinkled foreskins of all the boys born that year. My own had been tossed over that very cliff some 15 summers gone. From where I stood, halfway between the priest and the villagers, I could see much of Pont Romain. To this day I cannot but wonder upon that marvelous bridge built by those long-gone people who could work so many ageless miracles. Their construction survived as if carved from the bones of Terra herself. I knew them to be a blessed people also in that they brought the love of the true God and Church with them. The setting sun cast the bridge into shadow, but I could still see the stout arches, water-stained and lined with lichen, the edges of the stones amicably smoothed with the rains of ages. The ceremony stood in melancholy contrast to that holy bridge. Gerard motioned with his jutting finger for me to move closer to Clement. I had a heart to support my friend, who I knew was only reluctantly doing this perceived duty, but I also wanted no appearance of taking part in the ritual as anything save a reluctant observer. I stepped a few paces closer, counting on Gerard not wanting to disrupt the ceremony any more than needed, and he let me stay with no more complaint than an evil eye. The setting sun cast the villagers' shadows like a dark forest reaching to engulf the priest, while Clement's shadow looked as if it were being sucked over the lip of the ravine into the unseen cave below. My own shadow was inexorably drawn into the abyss until the twilight engulfed us all. Mon père, though it was impossible to think of him in his station wearing those sacrilegious vestments, began a chant so ancient and alien that I could scarcely imagine the words to have any meaning in tongues old or new, yet all recalled them well, for they had a dark, poetic flow like a poisoned syrup to our ears. Gerard cast his wicked eye, which seemed quite at home in this foul ritual, at me once again when I gave in to the growing need to genuflect before God. First into the ravine were the leathery foreskins, followed by the leather bag, and Clement's guttural cry that echoed back from the dark below in ghostly whispers. Then Clement reached into the coop, wrung the flapping rooster's neck, and flung it over the side, calling out more strange words. Finally, this good Christian man withdrew a wickedly curved obsidian dagger and slit the throat of the struggling wolf. Blood splattered on the priest's hands, face, and unholy vestments. When the wolf lay lifeless, Clement wiped the blade clean and hid it once again before dragging the carcass towards the cliff by one of the binding ropes. Seeing him struggle with the task, I moved to help despite myself. Mon père bade me stay with his bloody scowl. With a final, terrible chant, delivered between grunts of effort, he rode the beast over the edge. The villagers raised their hands and called back, "Gayi!" Everyone stared anxiously at me, for being well in the open, it was apparent that I had not given the required response. I could feel the fear growing heavy in the air as the assembly arms still overhead, watched me with eyes growing wider in the gloom with growing fear. "Alain!" Clement whispered harshly. I could not bear the scrutiny and reluctantly raised my hands and muttered the hateful pagan Amen. A collective sigh escaped the villagers, and everyone lowered their hands and slipped away to their homes. Not a few cast wary glances my way as they left. "If you send a pox on us, boy," Gerard said, his voice a low growl, "I'll take your hide, tonsure or no." He too then left, and I followed Clement back to our tiny church. I felt the sin heavy on me, and I could not help but scowl darkly at my priest. "Fear not, frere," he told me, in a cheer brought on by being done with the foul deed. "Absolution and mass in the morning, and prayers to the saints. God is merciful." I smiled without mirth or comment, for I knew that he most certainly was not always merciful. That very night I took quill to paper, and within the week travelled to the castle to have my letter sent to Paris. The Carchole must have been happy with the ceremony, as it was a bountiful year. Its tentacles, believed to be able to reach miles away to grasp its unwary victims, had been satisfied with the snatching of only a few lambs. Gerard left me alone on the matter, save for the occasional accusatory diatribe, usually loudly spoken in company, about how he thanked God that I had overcome my foolishness of that night and appeased the monster as was proper. But as La Toussaint approached the following year, a heavy dread began to weigh on me, like a dark mountain, for my conduct in that ritual still shamed me. I could not resolve in my heart to merely carry on as I always had, ignoring the blasphemy, yet I also feared capitulating again when pressed. The days were pleasant and mild, and the aroma of jasmine and mint drifted headily on the warm breeze from the forest, yet they gave me no joy. Clement found me once again in Pont Romain, rubbing the ancient archstones fondly and looking to the winding road and the horizon. "You look like a man waiting for something grave, Frere Alain." "I only await God's will." "As do we all," Clement said with a placid smile. "Do you seek him down the road?" I laughed, joyful for the first time in a week, for indeed I had seen movement on the distant road early that morning, and was now waiting to see if my prayers were being answered. "I do seek someone down the road, and I think today he comes." Clement furrowed his brow at me and shaded his eyes with a flat hand as he peered into the distance. "What are you playing at, Alain?" The disappointment in his voice hurt, and I knew he sensed the betrayal, but there was nothing I could say. "And just what brings two men of God to peer so intently down yon road?" Gerard called from behind. Even at his advanced age, the seigneur had a keen eye, especially for those he might catch idling. Without taking his eyes off the distant road, Clement answered, "Young Alain has worked some secret that is his to keep so far, it seems. Perhaps some mischief he learned in Paris?" "Some deviltry, I'd wager, mon père." Gerard cast his evil eye at me presently before rolling it to the distance. "Aye, through the woods. 2 men and a mule, a horse." The small party came about the bend in the road that cleared the forest, consisting of 2 men wrapped in black cassocks leading a dull-eyed donkey. Clement rounded on me. "Are those Jesuits?" He took me by the shoulders. "Did you bring the Jesuits, Alain?" "Yes," I confessed, my smile fading. "I met Padre Juanico in Paris. He is a brilliant scholar and master fencer, a holy man. If anyone can cast out demons, if anyone can help us—" "And a damned Spaniard!" Gerard's words came out in sprays of spittle. "A pox on your arse, boy! Why can't you leave well enough be? Do you think yourself wiser than your betters, wiser than your sires? You won't be satisfied until you draw out the beast and the whole village is left bones. He can help us get to the bottom of the Carchole and end our shame." Gerard tried to shout me down, but I'd had enough of him, so I shouted even louder. He was not used to being yelled at, and he quieted, glaring with his one eye. "We live in constant sin. We pray to a false god, and then to the saints as if all were well. We are under Balaam's curse, led astray and practicing witchcraft. Surely, Frere Elaine, Clement said to me after desperately waving at me to lower my voice, you have heard of the Auto de Fe? Certainly in Paris you must have heard. Sweat began trickling from the old priest's forehead. Mon père, I know Wanako well and have spent many hours studying with him. He knows at least 6 languages, and he is only interested in helping godly men do God's work. He has such a clarity on the nature of God and man and Scripture. Padre, he prefers his native honorific. Wanako is, I tried to calm myself, fearing I was too fawning in my review, very inspiring. The 2 men looked askance at me and then each other before turning back to watch the approaching Jesuits. Gerard shooed off a band of curious children, but we otherwise stood in silence, me joyful, the other 2 in dread. When the visitors had reached the midpoint of the venerable bridge, I could contain myself no longer and strode happily to meet them. Clement and Gerard were not to be left behind and were right on my heels. A bright smile broke out on the tall, red-headed man's face, and we embraced warmly. Alain! Wanako's French was flawless. It is so good to see you. And you. Despite the glares from my elders behind me, I was now beaming. This is mon père Clement Badeau, the village priest, and the landlord Signor Guiraud Paquin. And this is Padre Wanako di Soria of the Jesuit order. Though I don't know your friend, Padre. Wanako bowed and motioned to his companion. This is my student, Miguel Cardoso. I was pleased to get your letter, Elaine. I started to fear you'd not received it, Padre. He lifted his hands towards heaven. The Brotherhood and the Church have so much work to do while still down here. To be sure, and I apologize for my young lad's impertinence, Padre, Clement said as he stepped forward and clasped the Jesuit's hands. Surely your time is better spent denouncing the Huguenots, yes? I am almost embarrassed that you've been pulled from the Church's work to waste away in our tiny hamlet. The Padre laughed. I have indeed spent much time this year speaking against the Huguenots, and others, within the limits set by the Crown, of course. But there are many dangers to the souls of the faithful, and I was most intrigued by Alain's letter. The Jesuit's smile faded from genuine mirth to placid consideration as he looked to the cliff face. Is that the cave of the so-called beast? Surely only Charlemagne himself could slay such a monster, he added, winking at me. The cave was in the rock on the village side of the ravine. A treacherous ledge some 30 feet long led from the bridge to the hateful dark maw. A stone cross, nearly as large as a man, stood on the edge of the bridge to keep the villagers from the beast and the beast from the villagers. It stopped neither. Children still dared to shimmy around it, and the Carchole still snatched sheep, and did the multitude of other things blamed on its far-reaching tentacles, with impunity. I never dared tell any adult that I had once gone halfway down that ledge one night in a foolish dare. I nearly slipped to my death and quit my adventure quickly, much to the merriment and relief of the boy who had made the challenge. So-called? Gerard rolled his eye between the Jesuits and spat. Here not 5 minutes and already you think us mere bumpkins. Curse all Jesuits and bloody Spaniards. Wanako bowed low and Miguel followed his master's example, though not before narrowing his eyes at Gerard. It was not my intent, Gonsignor. My apologies. My experience has dulled my courtesy, as I've yet to investigate such a tale that has proven true. Thank you for reminding me that God loves humility. Gerard stared at the bowing Jesuits and grunted. If you stir up the Carchole with your foolery, the blood will be on your heads. He favored me with a jab from a gnarled finger. And that goes double for you, especially if you get your friend killed. He stormed back to the village. My apologies, Padre, Clement said. Gerard can be quite disagreeable, but he knows his business. And everyone else's, I muttered. Clement glowered at my disrespect, but I saw the twinkle of a smile in his eye. I'm sure he does, Wanako said, smiling once again. Might we impose on your hospitality, then we can discuss this. He waved his hand as if searching for the right words. Distasteful tradition. I knew from my time in Paris that Padre Wanako was not one to sit idle. He was the type of man I would have loved to grow to be. brilliant, adventurous, and handsome. I knew he'd be about his business at first light. We did indeed talk long of the legend, and when Clement showed the Jesuit the trappings of the ceremony, it was pity instead of righteous outrage that filled his eyes. This is when Clement finally believed the Padre's repeated claim that he was not here to haul us off before an inquisitor, but to banish the beast. Were he to bring me before one, however, I would have poured out my heart without hesitation, for my sin weighed so heavily. I asked Wanaco to hear my confession, and it lifted my soul in a way Clement could not, for I knew him to be in the same sin. My spirits were immediately dashed, though, for mon père saw me leaving the church with Wanaco, and hung his head. I can only think the guilt I suddenly felt flash brightly on my face, giving Clement the clue that I had gone to another for that holy rite. We did not speak until dawn. It was a simple breakfast, for Wanaco refused to impose more than a little, and he was eager to get on exploring the cave, for that was how he planned on disproving our demon. I doubted it would convince the villagers without an accompanied column of fire from heaven or a monstrous severed head. Such traditions are hard to let go, Wanaco said, putting his arm about my shoulder. But it will be a start. In time, people will remember that damn crazy Jesuit who went into the monster's cave and came out unharmed. Are you so sure nothing will happen? I asked, very concerned still. I trusted him, but the Carchole had been a reality my entire life, and it would take a great need for me to dare enter. Absolutely. You are right to think there is no beast. You have merely grown up with the teaching of it with your mother's milk. Of course, it is difficult for the head to unteach the heart what it thinks it knows, but once taught otherwise, he smiled again, his blue eyes bright, people will know better. Padre Wanaco adroitly bypassed the cross, even pausing to genuflect while holding the rail with one hand. A bright brass storm lantern had been lit and hung on his belt, for the narrow space at the mouth of the cave didn't allow for room to strike flint and steel. He made it easily to the edge of the cave as I, mon père, Signor Miguel, and Girard stood watching. Miguel pawed at the bridge anxiously, having been told by the padre 3 times to stay there. Many villagers had also come to watch when the word spread, but Girard chased them off with threats of fines or a lashing. Many risked the consequences of the Signor and reassembled again farther in the distance. Girard chose to ignore them for now. Wanaco looked back at us and smiled, giving a jaunty wave before lifting the lantern. He firmed his grip on a rocky handhold with his free hands, slid his feet carefully into the cave's lip, and crouched down to enter. Miguel let a great sigh and offered a short prayer in Spanish. The second after Wanaco stepped past the cave's threshold, he screamed. My heart stopped as I saw Wanaco's twisted face for 1 second, down on the lip of the cave as if he'd been jerked from his feet. The lantern crashed against the rock, shattering the glass and spilling the oil within, and a fire sprang up all around him. The padre flailed for a handhold but found none, and his face and arms slipped quickly into the darkness. A terrible bestial bellow echoed through the ravine. I could only think of the Chevalier of Clement's childhood. It was true, all true. The Carchole was real and had just killed a priest, had just killed my friend. I was too frozen in fear to even think about trying to stop Miguel as he hopped past the cross, without genuflecting, by the way, and raced recklessly down the ledge. Girard worried about upsetting the monster even more, and Clement afraid of getting into trouble, were calling for the Spaniard to stop, but he didn't, and nearly fell several times in his haste. Miguel leaped to the lip of the cave, and I think he would have fallen even if the near-invisible flames had not caught his cassock on fire, for it had been a clumsy jump. He tried to smother the flames as his arms were wheeling for balance, and fell screaming to be dashed on a jagged formation of rocks we called the monster's teeth. Miguel's screaming stopped as suddenly as did his fall, the robes continuing to burn in the silence below. Then Girard started laughing, guffawing as I've never seen the cruel old man do, even when he was enjoying handing out some spiteful punishment. "A pox on the damned Spanish and all Jesuits," he said with difficulty, clutching his sides. Wanako and the beast were now silent within the cave. Mon Dieu, Clement gasped, falling to his knees and crossing himself over and over. I shrank away, almost fleeing, as Gerard rounded on me and grabbed me by the throat. You see what you've done, boy. You're supposed to be a fra, but you're not but a boy. A damn fool boy who can't just leave the world alone. He shook me violently, which I think was the only thing that kept me from weeping. He pulled me so close that we were nose to nose, and I could smell the garlic in his rotting teeth. How are your friends now, Helene, eh? If that be so much as tips a cowboy, I'm going to throw you down on the teeth with that damn Spaniard. You understand? I understood him, and more importantly, I believed him. Visions of the monster's forthcoming wrath occupied my thoughts and dreams. But nothing happened. The Carchole must have been satisfied with his meals. Sicard the fisherman found Padre Wanako 2 days later, deep gashes all over his face and body from what must have been huge teeth. Gerard ordered me, alone, to recover and bury the bodies. Clement agreed. And that, young Mathieu, is why I must wear this blasphemy. I too challenged mon père in my day, so I am not a bit angry that you challenged me. I'm actually quite proud. My acolyte looked at me suspiciously, not trusting my professed goodwill. Of course, Wanako was right, you know. The villagers did remember what happened to those crazy Jesuits who challenged the Carchole's lair. I am the only one alive still who saw it clearly, despite what many claim, though many villagers saw it from afar. A flaming, screaming Jesuit falling to his death can leave quite an impression across generations. They were good men, and their deaths weigh heavily on my conscience even to this day, Mathieu. Of course, Gerard, bless his soul, told the tale as if the Carchole had set poor Miguel on fire with dragon's breath. Nonsense, of course, but that is how the tale is now remembered. Perhaps for the best. I laughed despite myself and struggled to keep the horn crown in place, as I have every year since I became mon père of my little village. It is no longer so distasteful to my spirit, though the blood-spattered clothes are viscerally repulsive with their smell of sweet mildew and tangy gore. I fancy I can still smell Clement on it, though he's been dead these many decades, and it comforts me. Atou looks at me askance, so reminiscent of his father Renaud, and I laughed again. They are good, God-loving people, Mathieu. This trifle of a ceremony, this annual soirée, gives me, comfort, since I tell you the Carchole exists. I've seen it kill, as did the mon père before. All any well-meaning intervention ever did for these people was to bring evil. So I say let them have their comfort. I pause to genuflect. And I also say, let the Pope stay in Rome. For what is religion for, Frère Mathieu, if not to comfort our souls?